Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you've ever tried to build a shared community from the ground up, you know firsthand it's kind of like trying to build a house using nothing but a hammer. I mean, if everyone brings the exact same tool to the site, literally nothing gets built, right? The dream of mutual aid and horizontal living is incredibly beautiful for sure, but putting it into practice, that's the hard part. Today, we're unpacking a vital source text that basically acts as a survival guide for collective living. We're going to look at exactly how shared communities don't just scrape by, but actually thrive by embracing this concept of unity and diversity and totally rejecting the slow poison of parochialism.
Because, let's face it, this is the elephant in the room for any collective project. What keeps a commune from collapsing into authoritarianism? We all know that existential fear, right? You start out with this amazing group of dedicated equal individuals, and then a few years later, somehow, a few voices end up dominating. The rules get rigid, and that vibrant horizontal project you started suddenly feels like a bureaucracy. Well, the source text tackles that fear head-on. It frames the way we handle our differences not just as some nice feel-good philosophical idea, but as the literal structural foundation that keeps authoritarianism at bay.
So let's jump straight into Section 1, the threat to the commune.
The text drops this really heavy truth right out of the gate. A commune that cannot embrace difference will collapse into sectarianism, isolation, or authoritarianism. Demanding sameness, expecting everyone to think, act, and live in the exact same way, is actually a fatal structural weakness. Think of it like trying to build a wall out of dry, completely identical bricks, but with no mortar. Sure, it might look perfectly uniform from the outside, but the second the ground shakes even a little bit, the whole thing shatters. When a community demands that everyone acts the exact same way, it becomes just as brittle. It isolates itself from new ideas, and inevitably, somebody has to step up to enforce that uniformity, which, that's the exact authoritarian trap communes are built to escape in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 2, the poison of parochialism.
Okay, let's dive into this definition of parochialism. The text defines it as the tendency to privilege one's own group, identity, or perspective while excluding or devaluing others. To make this concrete, think of it like a sterile monoculture farm. If you plant only one single type of crop across hundreds of acres, well, it might look super neat and orderly for a season. But because there's absolutely no variety, a single disease or a sudden change in the weather can literally wipe out the entire harvest overnight. Sectarianism and ethnocentrism function exactly the same way in human communities. They create this social monoculture that is just incredibly fragile.
And the text actually gives us some very specific, grounded examples of what this looks like in practice. It manifests as factions prioritizing their own ethnic or cultural group's needs over the broader collective, or, it looks like majority domination in a general assembly, where the folks who speak the loudest simply outvote and dismiss the quieter minority voices. It can even be as simple as a rigid adherence to the way we've always washed the dishes or the way we've always farmed the plot, completely shutting out any new methods. The takeaway here is that when one single affinity group or ideological faction takes over the decision-making process, they just end up reproducing the exact same logic of domination and hierarchy that the commune was created to abolish.
So the source presents this really stark contrast. On one side, you have that monoculture farm, stagnant, fragile, and requiring constant external control just to maintain its artificial sameness. That represents parochialism. But on the other side, a thriving, biodiverse forest. It doesn't need a boss or external control, right? Its strength comes from a complex organic web of totally different species supporting each other. This is exactly the organic sensibility the text wants us to adopt for our communities.
Moving right along to Section 3, the ecosystem analogy.
So the crucial point is this definition of unity in diversity. It means that strength comes not from uniformity, but from the active coexistence of different perspectives, talents, and identities. But, and this is a really vital caveat in the text, this coexistence absolutely has to happen within a shared framework of mutual respect. The source suggests thinking of it kind of like a community potluck. Everyone brings a completely different dish. That's the diversity part. But everyone agrees on the basic ground rules. Nobody steals from the table, and everyone gets a plate. We share the core rules, but the different flavors we all bring, that's what makes the meal actually worth eating.
Let's walk through how the text applies this analogy practically. In natural ecosystems, biodiversity is what ensures resilience. If one plant struggles, another thrives and fixes nitrogen for the soil. In communes, when you have multiple cultural traditions, it actively enriches our collective life. You get better food, varied music, and entirely different frameworks for problem solving. And then, on a hyperlocal level, a neighborhood with mixed ages and a wide variety of skills ensures that no single group bears all the burden of labor or care work. It's basically a localized, highly resilient human ecosystem.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, Unity without conformity.
The source defines this as unity without uniformity. True unity isn't about throwing everyone into a giant melting pot and forcing them to be identical. Not at all. It's about working side by side without a boss, while fundamentally respecting the autonomy of individuals and groups. You don't have to be the exact same to build something amazing together. You just have to be deeply committed to the same horizontal structure.
And this brilliantly illustrates what unity without uniformity looks like on the ground. Think about how our affinity groups operate. You might have a food affinity group, an education affinity group, and a health affinity group. Now, they all have completely different focuses, different daily rhythms, and totally different internal cultures, right? But they cooperate seamlessly for the common good of the commune. The food group doesn't dictate how the health group operates, and vice versa. It is absolute autonomy and difference, woven together beautifully by mutual aid.
Let's be clear, treating dissent or different worldviews as a threat to unity, that is the absolute hallmark of authoritarian systems, as outlined by the text. That mindset requires policing behavior with an iron grip. But when coexisting worldviews are based on true equality and horizontality, the source argues the commune remains flexible and creative enough to adapt to any crisis. So long as individuals respect the core tenets of the community, their differences are actually a shield, not a vulnerability.
That brings us to our final section, safeguarding the minority voice. The text provides a really powerful, unbending structural rule here to protect the community from parochialism, and it's simply this: the affected must have the final say. Think about it. If the commune is deciding what time the night shift workers have to turn off their lights, well, the night shift workers get the final vote. Obviously. By mandating that those most directly impacted by a decision have the ultimate authority over it, the source argues you structurally prevent the tyranny of majority rule.
And the source is very specific about who needs safeguarding. It explicitly states that councils must ensure women hold an equal voice, and that ethnic, cultural, or ideological minorities within the commune are fully protected. The structure of the commune itself has to be designed to act as a shield for marginalized groups. Because, let's be real, if a 51% majority can just strip away the resources or autonomy of the 49%, well, that is definitely not a commune. That's really just a different flavor of the state.
I really want to pause on this incredibly poetic line from the text. It says, diversity is not a problem to be managed, but a treasure to be cultivated. In a hierarchical society, difference is so often treated as an administrative headache, right? Something to be smoothed over or suppressed. But within an anarchist framework, this text argues that difference is the very thing that strengthens our bonds. It enriches our daily lives, and it acts as the ultimate shield against stagnation and oppression.
But of course, theory is only as good as the practice it inspires. The survival of shared horizontal communities depends entirely on moving away from those fragile monocultures of parochialism and stepping into the resilient, biodiverse reality of mutual respect. So, take a hard look at your own affinity groups, your local councils, your tool-sharing networks. Who isn't in the room? Whose voice is being outvoted by the majority? How will you actively cultivate the treasure of difference in your collective today? Think about that and definitely take it to your next assembly.